manager. Anyway, rather than introduce you...
Can I add a couple of comments really quick from Michael?
Please do.
Password 9, is that a strong password if it's not?
I wouldn't have thought so.
And for James in the back, CPM, DOS, concurrent DOS, Windows 2.0, Windows 3.0, Windows 3.11, these ringing numbers. So thank you, Paul, for inviting me to speak. I'm going to shift the thinking a little bit because what I have today is not another briefing to scare you. I'm already scared and I'm ready to put my phone in one of those biscuit tins that the Germans are now doing in meetings. How many of you read that article? They're starting to put their phones in meetings in biscuit tins because they're worried about nefarious behaviors. But what I want to offer you today, I want to brief you on something we're doing in the United States. And I want to give you some food for thought for whether or not this would work here. And I was wondering how to open my presentation. And thanks to the previous speakers, they gave me a wonderful opening. So I want to give you some terms to keep in the back of your mind. From Rich, Risk Intelligent Organization. Risk Intelligent Organization. Keep that one in mind. From Paul, Foreknowledge. From Pater, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, I apologize. Pater, right? Is he here? Is that right, Pater? No surprises, influence executives. I don't know if this mic is working. Is it working? Can you hear me in the back? A couple of speakers spoke about NDAs. We can't tell you. We can't tell you we've signed NDAs. Keep that in mind. A question came up. Give me an example of a successful DDoS mitigation. Somebody laughed back there. James, cyber victory, there's more of us than them. And finally, Michael, I love the term misfortunes of others. You'll see in a second I have many screw-ups. You'll almost think I couldn't hold down a job. And finally, also Michael, know your enemy. So, a little bit about me first, just to kind of set the context. 30 years of IT design development. I started off as a Navy cryptologist in the United States Navy, retired in 1997. I retired from a little three-letter agency called the National Security Agency, in case some of you may have heard of it. I've held a number of jobs. I hold committee positions with privacy and security in the United States. I've got a lot of scars. I've seen a lot of successes. I've seen a lot of failures. These are some of the organizations I've worked with. I was a member of the Naval Security Group for 20 years. National Security Agency, many federal agencies, even local police, even the NYPD has the same problems that you heard discussed in this room today. So there's nobody who escapes this stuff. But I'm not here to scare you, but you heard these things, and I'm going to quickly go through this. The consequences, the financial consequences you heard about. One other risk item that's emerging now in this cloud environment, just as a footnote, how many of you are on shared sources or on the cloud? How many of you heard about the FBI in Dallas confiscating the servers out of the data center in the middle of the night? You know how many other companies were on those servers besides the ones they were targeting? How do you factor that into your risk management? That's a whole other presentation. So cyber is an enabler. I'm coming into Europe. I've spent my whole life in the United States. I have personal reasons and also just second half of life reasons for coming to Europe. I've worked with NATO in Belgium. I've been to Amsterdam with a Microsoft effort they're trying to deploy to help public safety there. But it's very interesting that even the EU Organized Crime Threat Assessment for 2011, how many of you have seen that? It's on the website, and I can give you the website later. But if you look at it, there is a pointer on here. I think I just did. There we go. Not that one. How about that one? It's not all about cyber crime in the sense of tangible crime. They're also doing it and using the internet in general for command and control of criminal activities that may not have cyber consequences. So they're using social media sites to send plans to each other through steganography and other means. And the threat assessment makes some very interesting statements about marketing victims of human trafficking. When's the last time you heard about cybercrime and human trafficking? You hear about child exploitation and pictures and photos, but not about the transactions. We saw a movie the other night about 3 children who are being trafficked through London, in fact. But you don't hear about the cyber aspect of that. You just hear about the physical aspect. The adversaries, everybody today talked about how organized they are, how motivated they are. It's a new landscape. That same threat assessment talked about it. Highly mobile, flexible groups, widespread, illicit use of the internet. So it's not just about the cyber crime, it's not just about stealing money, it's about making money in illicit activities, but using the internet to communicate for command and control purposes. So I offer you that we need to organize like the bad guys. It's going to take a network of us to defeat the network of them. Okay, so that's my first offer to you. We can't do it individually. We can't do it just by signing up to memberships of organizations and getting the monthly newsletters and magazines. We can't do it by just going to training classes and becoming certified. Each of us in the room has a piece of the puzzle. In my old NSA days, each of us has a piece of the puzzle, and we need to bring those pieces together to learn more about knowing the enemy. So what I want to tell you today is about Infragard. How many of you have heard of Infragard, the US Infragard? 1, 2, 3. So I want to tell you about Infragard, and then I want to show you a little model about maybe how it might work here. Starting in Ireland, maybe expanding to Europe. But it's not me, it's got to be you, and I'm certainly willing to help. And I think the ICTTF, with what Paul started, is a perfect platform to launch this. Now let me show you. It's a public-private partnership established by the FBI in 1996, and it was largely focused around cybercrime. And the problem was companies were getting hit, but they weren't talking to each other, and they weren't talking to the FBI. So the FBI started this project that said, we will protect your fiduciary interests. We won't tell people that you got hit, but we want to learn about it so we can go investigate it. And that's another one of those risk items, like I mentioned. You know, if it becomes an investigatory matter, is your risk model factored in, not having a server? So do you have a continuity of operations or a business continuity plan? How's that factored into your IT plans? Disaster recovery is a very painful process. So we're up to like 42,000 members, 84 chapters around the US. We have 5 objectives. First and foremost, the FBI wants to share threat information with the owners of critical infrastructure. And I'm going to tie this into critical infrastructure. That was the title of my presentation. Because I believe almost everybody, if not everybody in the room, is somehow a member of the critical infrastructure of either Ireland or whatever other country that you come from. Telecommunications companies? How many? Aircom? Food and agriculture? At least 1, 2. Financial services? Any defense? Public safety? Public health? Each of you are a piece of a critical infrastructure. I'll show you a picture in a minute that shows you how it fits in. So in the US, it's largely the government agencies that know the threats. And so the FBI wanted a way of sharing that threat information with those different communities. Second is, they want the communities to share information with them. Tell us what you're seeing. Botnets. I went to a botnet presentation a couple years ago, and it was like the first time that 40-something people got in a room and talked about the different experiences they were having with that threat. They also provide a trusted method for sharing information. We have a encrypted internet portal kind of thing that they post up for official use only and sensitive information about threats. Stronger liaison with law enforcement and Homeland Security. And they also have education and training. So it's not just the Bureau training you, it's that you will train your fellow critical infrastructure partners. So the utility, the energy companies come together and they talk about SCADA threats. We just had a big cyber SIG that we established, and it was focused solely on the SCADA issues because of the threat that it posed. So we have a 2-tier level. We have a national non-for-profit corporation that oversees all the chapters, and then every state has at least 1 chapter. Some states have 2. The national level folks deal with the big relationships with the FBI. They manage the protocols, the bumpers in the lanes. What does Infragard do? What doesn't it do? And then we have local organizations, which I'm a part of. In fact, here's the Maryland website. I was past first vice president. I was the programs director. I've been involved about 5 years, and it's been extremely successful. The FBI won't tell us exactly how many cases came out of it or who may have gone to jail because of the tips and leads that we collected and shared and the information shared, but it's been a very important part of our efforts in Maryland to protect Maryland's critical infrastructure. DHS came into the picture a couple years ago, and what they brought with it was their National Infrastructure Protection Plan. And it's basically the same kinds of things, except it has a little bit more of a terrorism flavor to it. So they're more about protecting critical infrastructure from terrorists. The FBI was much broader because they're looking at things like identity theft and financial fraud. Mortgage fraud was a big deal. And all that uses the majority of the infrastructures that you represent, the financial systems, the telecommunication systems. So these are our 18. I would venture to say everybody in the room could probably identify with one of them. And even if you're a consultant, like I am now, I still fit within the defense industrial base. Because as a consultant, I talk with other defense contractors, local law enforcement, and I help them to do better in understanding the threats, managing the risks, and the other important thing is the consequence. The DHS, the normal risk model was likelihood and consequence. Likelihood and consequence. The new model brings in threats, vulnerabilities, and then consequences. And there's a lot of information available on the website. If you go to dhs.gov or fbi.gov and look up, or infragard.org, you can find lots of information. And that's the beauty of this, I think, that if we bring this to Europe and we start forming better information sharing among the infrastructure owners in Europe, we don't steal anything. We can admire a lot of things that have already been put in place, and we can learn from the Infragard chapters and what's been done already and apply it here. We look at 3 different threats. Physical threats is like the Mumbai hotel, the Intercontinental Hotel, physical gates, guards, security systems, video cameras, alarms, access control. Cyber threats, I don't think I need to explain that. But the other one that quite often gets lost in the noise is a human threat. I personally believe that the physical or cyber threat can't even take place unless you have a human threat first. There's a human element, whether it's social engineering or dumpster diving or dropping the thumb drives in the parking lot. There's some human element that's going to be, in my old defense terms, preparing the battlefield, if you will, for either a cyber or a physical attack, or both in some cases. And this is the continuous improvement cycle from DHS in terms of setting goals and identifying and assessing risks. And this is all available in documents through DHS. So the other big European document that I researched is the European Commission Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Action Plan. How many of you seen that? This is published by the European Commission in 2009.
Makes it one of the best kept secrets.
It may be. Does any of this resonate? I think we've talked a lot about many of these items today. Funny enough, despite the consensus that public-private partnerships would also be desirable on a European level, European public-private partnerships have not materialized, and this was in 2009. Now, I know there are some efforts in place. There was just an updated report put out where they said we're either studying it more or we're starting to do something. And I'm doing more research to try to identify other entities that may be doing something, Europe-wide. But this is exactly what we have in the room. We have a public-private partnership right here. We came together today to talk about cyber threats. And one of the things I'm suggesting is that we continue this conversation beyond leaving the new convention center today and form some type of network. We organize like the terrorists around communities of consequence or communities of threat, however we want to decide, and begin to serve as Europe's public-private partnership. So in a nutshell, I'm kind of bringing Infragard to Europe and seeing if you want it. Okay. And I think you started it, and like I said, with what you have today and the people in the room. So what would it look like? Build on the efforts of the ICTTF, adapt the features, the best features of what the U.S. has done. Maybe start as a private sector. You know, we probably can't go to Shakana today and say, hey, we want threat information. But there's a progression and a trust-building relationship that can happen where we can start off in a private level and then seek out government involvement and participation in having them talk to you more about the threats that they see at the government level, which obviously, with their methods from my old days, are probably a little bit more sophisticated than some of us have. Start small. An old Army general taught me to crawl, walk, then run. Maybe identify 3 to 5 countries. Establish a leadership team, an information sharing platform of some sort, sort of, you know, a trusted network of being able to share things. So maybe some of those NDAs that some of you signed, maybe there's components of it that you can share. You can share the characteristics of a breach without, you know, exposing the actual companies or the private personal information behind it. The enablers, I believe these might be things that we can get started with. And then, of course, can it work in Europe? And I'm sure some of you might be wondering, Chuck comes from a nation of 50 states, and there's one FBI, and they have domain over everybody. And that's true. So in the U.S., one country, one government-led agency, one set of laws, one central body. We have a very a federated model. Europe, many countries, many sets of laws, many government agencies. There's no central body except possibly the European Commission, and there's another communications agency, I believe, under the EU Commission that may be a partner in this. So in the U.S., we look something like this, where there's a national board, we have state chapters, and then we have special interest groups based on either horizontal, like cyber threats, or we go vertical with food and agriculture, special interest groups, or telecommunications, or defense and defense sector. For Europe, it might look like this, where select countries that have an interest and there's a company that wants to get started might form a cell. And I can't advocate enough for us, the need for us to organize like the bad guys if we're going to defeat them, because they're organized like this. Next steps. Possible next steps, if you like the idea. So this is where I give you homework now. Think about it. That's me, contact information. Questions? Or did I just hit you completely from a different side? So you've heard a lot about the threats. We're all sufficiently scared. What I'm offering you is a possible way of organizing to help defeat that threat, or even to minimize it a little bit.